440 drones, 2 Kinzhal aero ballistic missiles for Caliber missiles, and 16 Kh-101 cruise missiles. On the night of June 17th, Russian forces launched a massive strike on Ukrainian territory. So, once again, Putin showed the whole world, and especially the leaders who came to Canada for the G7 summit, that terrorists have no interest in peaceful negotiations. All they want is to keep killing and destroying. Just in Kiev alone, 175 drones, 14 missiles, and at least 2 ballistic missiles were launched. The drones attacked the capital from different directions, including along the Dnieper River, creating a thread across the entire city. Debris from the missiles fell in various parts of Kiev, damaging hundreds of residential buildings, stores, and cars. In one of the city's districts, the entrance of a 9-story apartment building completely collapsed. A missile went through every floor, all the way down to the basement.
We were here in the passageway, and my mom and nephew were at home. But when the strike happened, they managed to get out and come down to us afterwards. There was a cook there and some acquaintances too. They're gone. They all died.
So that's confirmed already?
Yes, that's confirmed. She's not answering her phone. She was either on the 2nd or 3rd floor. She worked as a cook at Vostok. She died along with my nephew, and he was a displaced person either from Donetsk or Dnipro.
In Kiev, at least 10 people were killed, more than 100 were injured, and some are in serious condition. Zaporizhzhia, Odessa, and Konotop were also hit. The Russians had prepared for this strike in advance, and the timing was no coincidence either.
Putin does this on purpose, just during the G7 summit. He sends a signal of total disrespect to the United States and other partners who have called for an end to the killing. Russia not only rejects a ceasefire or a leaders' meeting to find solutions and end the war, it cynically strikes Ukraine's capital while pretending to seek diplomatic solutions. Putin's goal is very simple: make the G7 leaders appear weak. Only strong steps and real pressure on Moscow can prove him wrong. Andriy Sybiha, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, on social network X.
Before the summit began, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen also stated that more pressure needs to be put on Russia to ensure a ceasefire in Ukraine. She called on the G7 countries to strengthen sanctions to achieve this goal. The restrictions already in place have produced results. Since the start of the war, Russia's revenues from oil and gas have dropped by almost 80%.
To achieve peace through strength, we must put more pressure on Russia to secure a real ceasefire, to bring Russia to the negotiating table, and to end this war. Sanctions are critical to that end. As a result of the G7 and EU sanctions combined, for example, Russian oil and gas revenues have fallen by almost 80% since the beginning of the war. So the sanctions are working. And we will do more. Last week, we put forward a proposal for an 18th sanctions package. I will invite all G7 partners to join us in this endeavor.
The new package of European Union sanctions is primarily aimed at the energy and banking sectors of the aggressor country. The EU is proposing to lower the price cap on Russian oil from $60 to $45 per barrel. All G7 countries are also being called upon to join these measures. And it is very important to do this right now when, because of the war in the Middle East, oil prices are rising again, and the Kremlin could use that money to buy new Iranian drones or components for ballistic missiles. Let me remind you, Ukraine actually proposed setting the price cap on Russian oil at $30 per barrel.
Clearly, Russia is not anybody, or Mr. Putin or President Putin is not somebody who can talk about peace while we see actions like this, and he's not a mediator that can really be considered. And we have to keep in mind that that Iran has helped Russia to do these attacks also against Ukraine, and and their cooperation is working in this regard. So no, Russia cannot be mediator if they don't really believe in peace. And then on the oil price cap, actually, I think that we should move forward with the oil price cap, especially because of the tensions also in the Middle East. The whole idea of the oil price cap is actually to lower the prices. I think we shouldn't end up in a situation where the situation in the Middle East will increase the oil prices and actually also make Russia to earn more, because that means that they are able to fund their war machine again in a bigger scale. So we definitely need to move on with the oil price cap.
Donald Trump cut short his participation in the G7 summit in Canada. According to Bloomberg, citing sources, his administration is skeptical about lowering the price cap. However, most of the G7 countries are ready to support this measure, even if the U.S. president is against it.
There is a technical level working group in the G7 that has looked at this issue. I think there was some consensus that $45 is the right level to aim for. We'll see how that goes in Canada. But we have strong support from Canada and the UK, so I think there will be a lot of people pushing and arguing for that $45 level. David O'Sullivan, EU Special Representative for Sanctions, in comments to Radio Liberty.
In May of this year, the average price of Urals crude oil was $52. For comparison, just a year ago the price was $15 higher. At the same time, Russia's oil and gas revenues for the budget dropped to 500 billion rubles per month. In April, it was $1 trillion, so that's a drop by exactly half. And any further decrease in oil prices could be simply catastrophic for Putin's war machine.
Additional pressure is needed to force Moscow to come to the negotiating table. That's why we want to introduce new sanctions in the EU at the end of the month. You all know the proposals regarding this. We want to convince our G7 partners and, in particular, the US to develop new measures on their side.
As for the U.S., American Senators Richard Blumenthal and Lindsey Graham have called on the head of the White House to support their bill to strengthen sanctions against Russia and to put it to a vote as early as this week. Let me remind you, this document provides for 500% tariffs on imports from countries that buy Russian oil, gas, uranium, and other resources. Basically, these are prohibitive measures that hardly anyone would dare to violate. Trump could stop it.
Trump could stop it, but for that to happen, Putin would have to be losing money. Only then will he be unable to expand his army, his military sector, and he'll start having internal problems. To achieve this, sanctions need to be imposed, including on the banking sector, the shadow fleet, and oil prices. It's especially important to limit the price caps, because oil is their main source of income.
Economists emphasize that it's not enough just to lower the price cap on Russian oil. It's also necessary to strengthen enforcement of its rule. Tracking the movements of Putin's shadow fleet is becoming increasingly difficult. The ships either don't report their location data or they send out false signals. That's why it's necessary to carefully monitor all shipping reports, including by using satellite images.
This is a very labor-intensive process. Enforcing the price cap. In other words, you have to reach every tanker, every trader, ship owner, and insurance company. And here, of course, the question is whether the Europeans actually have the bureaucratic capacity and enough people to monitor all of this. But the goal itself is good. It's a noble one. The only question here is, what experience do we already have with the price cap? The issue here is that if you lower the price cap, but don't take sufficient steps to have enough people to enforce it, then it just remains a declarative measure. I hope that won't be the case.
This year, Moscow planned to sell oil at $70 per barrel. Despite the high key interest rate, inflation continues to show steady growth every month. Already now, they have to cut back on programs that were previously considered priorities. And despite the show of indifference, the issue of sanctions remains one of the most painful for Putin. One can only imagine the kind of collapse that awaits the aggressor country's economy if the oil price cap is set at, say, at least $45 per barrel.